Welcome to the Wake the F Up podcast with Alix and Jamie, where we talk about living consciously and helping people uncover their essential self so they can stop sleepwalking through life. On this podcast, we're having raw conversations about difficult topics. Our goal is to create a safe space where our guests can talk about real problems and issues and how they decided to wake the F up and become mindfulness experts through their own emotional healing journey. Welcome to Wake the F Up podcast. I'm your host, Alix, along with my co-host, Jamie, and we are so excited to welcome today's guest, my husband, David. David Long is a very talented interventional radiologist who recently opened his own practice, Innovative Vascular Institute, here in San Antonio. He specializes in minimally invasive outpatient vascular surgery, focused on the preservation and prevention of limb loss, and curative treatments for painful vascular issues such as difficult wounds to treat and hemorrhoids. David and I met as young, widowed, single parents in New Orleans after we lost our spouses. We recently got married and moved to Texas with our 5 blended children, 3 dogs, and 1 cat. We could not be more in love, and he is the ultimate first male guest I wanted on the show to talk about grief, waking up, and what his healing journey has entailed. I am so proud to have him on this show and to have him as my life partner. Welcome, my love. We're so excited to have you. How are you today? This is a little new territory for you.
I'm fine.
All right, well, let's just dive right in. I think the number one thing that all women out there probably want to know, but we already know, is what got you to finally go to therapy? Because we all know that men fight that one pretty tough. So I'd love to hear what got you to go, when did you first think about going, and what actually, got you to take that step.
um, so I was married to my first wife for 17 years, and we were together for 20 plus years and had 3 children, which Alex mentioned. And 3 years ago, she passed away from a brain aneurysm, and on February 14th. And I guess that was kind of, I would describe my widow life as pretty thoroughly asleep. Um, I kept myself busy. I didn't really feel any more than was absolutely necessary. Um, and when she died, that just didn't work anymore. Um, I was with the 3 kids, and I was trying to take care of them and be a mom and a dad, and really was just drowning. And I made it about, I don't know, maybe 8 months, about 8 months with no therapy or anything. And actually, I fired my nanny like the week after she died. I just had this like internal feeling that I was supposed to do everything. Um, and I really just thought if I put my head down and really worked at it, that I could get it done. And that's the way I saw it, like getting it done, like something to pass through. And everybody kept telling me it just takes time and blah blah blah. Um, and my friends thought it would be a good idea for me to go with them to the beach, to the 38, Destin, and
Yeah.
beautiful beach. And so me and the kids went, and it was horrible. It was there were just all these families around, and of course my friends' families, and it was just me and the 3 kids, and I felt just dramatically out of control. And it dawned on me because the kids were running around the beach. It was really crowded. It was like, I guess, the middle of summer. And it dawned on me I had no idea where they were or what they were doing or, anything. And Tree was young. Tree was probably 10, maybe. And so I was in bed in the fetal position in this little house that we rented. And it just dawned on me that if I didn't get, that I needed help. And that if I didn't get help, that something was going to happen to my kids or me. And I decided that me just putting my head down and getting it done it just wasn't working. My kids and I weren't getting along. I really wasn't able to provide them with the like basic necessities, food and stuff, and do the emotional stuff because we were all super deep grief, and I had no idea what my kids were going through, honestly.
Were
Um,
they in therapy?
no, none of us. So I kind of decided I needed help then, actually. And when I came home from that trip, I was like, I either need to kill myself or get help.
Isn't it so interesting that like your your time to go to therapy was
Yeah. Yeah. So before that, my only interaction with therapy, which I think is pretty typical, Betsy and I would lay in bed and talk about, oh, I heard, this doctor and his wife are in therapy. They're having marriage problems, and we would literally say, isn't it great that we don't need therapy? We don't have those problems, you know? We had lots of problems. We had lots of just emotionally closed off things. We never really talked about our feelings. We never, I mean, in 17 years of marriage, she never one time told me what she needed, not one time. And I never told her what I needed or wanted. I didn't even know. In fact, I thought that was a feature. Like I thought, look how great it is that we're together and we have this relationship. We don't really have to bother each other with our needs.
I'm sure there's a lot of marriages out there that are probably the exact same
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. And so I came home and I started looking for a therapist, and actually, it was kind of hard to find one, honestly. Um, the first one was a recommendation from a friend, and she was like very evasive. And like initially, she was very engaging and said, absolutely, I can help you and your family, blah, blah, blah. And then she kind of put me off for like 6 weeks, oh, we'll start next month. And then like I waited a month. I was
Mhm.
in horrible spot for a whole month waiting for her. And then a month went by and she said, you know what, it's going to be 2 more weeks. And I was like, okay. And luckily about that time, Alex and I started kind of talking. We connected over the grief or the widow thing, really. And she told me, she asked me how therapy was going. And I was like, I don't have a therapist.
yeah, he told me I don't have a therapist and I was like, well, how he was working what a week on, a week off, two
No, I
weeks
mean,
on?
I was on call Q4 and
No nanny, right?
yeah,
So all night a trauma surgeon out
yeah, it
with
was
3 kids. His youngest is 10. So he would leave, nobody cooking dinner, nobody doing laundry. When he told me this, I thought, holy shit, like, if my broke ass had a nanny and cancer, I'm pretty sure, the surgeon should be having a nanny, like some sort of help with dinner or something, because it's just when you're in debilitating grief, like that acute stage post losing somebody. And all of us, right? Even if you're not a grieving person, let's just say, and you're in a marriage, when you're in a marriage with two working people, you need help. And even when you're
Yes.
not with one working person, you need help. When you have children, it is so challenging. And I think we should make this point. If you need help and you're in your marriage and you're suffering and you're disconnected because you're feeling that I'm so tired and resentful vibe that we often get because we're too ashamed to admit we can't do it all. And so we don't tell our partner because there's some fear there, both that we're not good enough and then maybe that like they'll judge us and not think we're doing enough. And because it's an internal female dialogue, men, if you're listening, or vice versa, like we all don't feel like we're doing enough. And so ask for help and get the therapist,
well,
right?
I think I, like if you'd asked me why I never got therapy, I think this is probably pretty common. I definitely saw it as a weakness, a sign of weakness, which I think really ties into the one of the, in my opinion, one of the men problems is that you're just not allowed. And I know this for a fact, that my first wife needed me to. She would tell me this all the time that she needed me to be the rock, that she needed me to be strong, that she needed me to, um, do the things that she couldn't do. And then of course the unspoken need is, pay the mortgage and get the cars and all that stuff that you just carry around. And stupidly, I used to think that that stuff was that was a compliment, right? That she needed me meant that I was needed, and if I was needed, then I was wanted, and if you're wanted, that kind of makes you feel good, right? But the truth is, over after years and years and years and years and years and years and years of that, it really, really grates on you, and it led to a lot of resentment on my part, and just a lot of overwhelming, you know, need to be something. She used to tell me, Alice has heard this story, but she used to tell me, "You're the rock, and I'm the river," and I used to think, "Yeah, I'm the rock. I'm rock solid." And now, after lots of therapy, I realize really what she was saying was she needed me to be a certain way and no other way. So, for example, if I would cry at a movie um, or I needed to tell her what I needed, I wasn't allowed to do that. Um, and honestly, part of the widow thing was that um, I felt like that if I didn't start to feel or let my feelings out, that I was going to die. I really felt like a visceral, um, impending death type thing. It's so hard to describe, but
Hmm.
it feels like it's gonna just swallow you up. And I knew, or I felt that if I let it swallow me up by trying to keep it down, that I would die. Um, and one of the very first things my therapist allowed me to do was just to feel and to cry and to be angry and to be unstable.
And when you say aloud, what does that mean? Like just a safe space for you to be able to do that without being judged?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and I won't even put it all on Betsy. A lot of it was me. I mean, it was
Yeah. Well, I
internal
think
pressure on yourself.
you brought up a really, really good point that I think most marriages, at least I know I definitely am rethinking things right now, is the, you know, the expectations of like the husband role and the wife role. I
Yeah,
think we definitely overlook because I know, I'm very what's the new age, Darren cooks. I don't cook that much. Like there's not the strong roles I would say in our family, but there are those things where I do rely on him to be my rock in certain ways. And when he does open up, it almost stresses me out, and I'm sure
right,
with my anxiety that
right.
he feels that when he opens up to me, even though I'm always, "Please talk to me. Let's have an open dialogue." It's hard to, you both know me very well to know that I put all my emotions on my face. I mean, I don't hold back. So, thinking of when your husband does open up to you and tell you those things and isn't your rock, how you react. Even when I'm trying to be there for him, you can't help that the anxiety and the, your own
Yep.
personal emotions to shine through. And I
Yeah,
definitely think that's a huge thing
Well,
they probably overlook.
I'm so glad we're talking about this because when we were founding this company, we wanted a way to include men in this healing process. Although, naturally the organization that we've been running prior to this tends to be a female dominated group that's following us to start. But one of the things that I want to make sure that we're doing is reaching out to everyone. And I think that if women are the primary listeners currently and men are starting to catch on, women, I'll start with you, we have a real responsibility. If inside of yourself you want something from your partner, right? And then again, every time they give you little chunks of this and try to be vulnerable with you, and then your reaction initially is fear based
Hmm.
reactions or clamming up or pushing it away, you are never going to have the life that you want because these micro fear cosms that you're placing in between you and your partner, and this doesn't have to be male and female, this can just be, I'm using that as an example, but I think we do this a lot in vulnerable spaces where we want this deep connection. But when that's presented in a moment of very, very difficult circumstances in your marriage, or like when money's hard, or your
Let's say
kid is having
it's
an
usually
issue,
around money.
it's always, yeah, money for sure. It's all these vulnerable things where you feel not enoughness, that those are the spaces to just take a risk and lay it all on the table. And I guess my biggest thing that I've learned to stop being as afraid of death is you lose either way, right? You lose holding back. And I think David's story to me is one of the saddest and most powerful transformations I've ever heard of, because he and Betsy's love was so great and sitting right next to each other, but they never could meet each other in the middle. And I think all it would have taken was one of them to get vulnerable enough and for the other to allow it to happen. And I think that's partnership in itself, is we have to have ability to get vulnerable, and we have to hold space for the vulnerability even when it scares us. And
That's
truth be
key.
told, I'm scared of David's not rockness a lot. His anxiety 5 years ago would have sent me into a tailspin, because you want your significant other to tell you everything's going to be okay. That's like almost in every fairy tale we've
Yep.
read and been given since we were little. That's why these fairy tales are sometimes a total shit show.
The
Just
white,
to,
the
ah,
what is it? The Oh
it's like
my
the
God.
Snow White. Yeah, it's like
Yes.
all the things, right? The Sleeping Beauty. All we're waiting for a man to come rescue us, and then
Yeah, just put your hair down.
the new
Yeah.
Barbie movie is so interesting. Today, my therapist literally quoted the Barbie movie, which made me laugh, because I was like, I could never imagine her. She's such a liberal quoting the Barbie movie, but in that one moment, just saying like all these roles put on us that it's just we're in a no-win situation that maybe we've put ourselves in, but we're putting our men in. We continue to put ourselves in these gender roles that we cannot fulfill all the things. And so, what if with your partner you just say fuck it, it's going to be vulnerable no matter what. We chose to make a life together, and so in that we have to lay it on the table, because they either are going to love you or they're not. And the big fear is you're not going to be lovable if you show your real self. And that's, I think, in death, what makes our marriage so powerful is that when you're cracked as open as we were when we met, we didn't have reserve, we didn't have energy, and we were so broken that we were wide open. And so we had to look at it from the start and decide if that's something
Yeah.
that we can
Well,
love.
But
it's
Go ahead.
I'd say it's interesting because when you say like, Snow White, because that's very much our generation that like, when we were growing up, we watched Snow White and Rapunzel and all those things. And then I look at how I'm raising Sloan now and, I always catch myself whenever he gets upset. I'm like, it's okay to cry. And I'm like, make sure. And I think a lot of moms right now can associate with that. Like we try to tell our kids, it's okay to cry. It's okay to feel like, let's put a, like, let's talk about your feelings. But then on the other hand of that is when our husbands come home and they have something wrong that affects us and our stability and like our little safe nest, we don't act the same way. I'm talking about myself. I don't always act the same way with Darren. It's more of like, well, what do you mean? What's wrong? Like, tell me more details. I need to know more, instead of just, okay, that's all right. Like, let's talk about it. Let's flesh it out. And I think
Well,
I
and
don't know. It's
remember too,
interesting to
they're
hear other
modeling.
things.
Our kids are modeling. I'm really learning that more and more the older mine get. So like, I had an interesting day. Yes, this morning I got up early. My daughter keeps trying to wear booty shorts and a midi top with combat boots, and I mean she looks amazing. She's beautiful. Um,
I love this.
Whatever, right? But she's 10 years old, and so I'm like, sweetie, the dress code at school, you can't wear a midi top and booty shorts. Please, you got to put a longer short shirt on, and I'm trying to walk this fragile line of like, this is the age at 10 where you start to really pay attention to your body. And her outfit doesn't make her anything. It doesn't tell a story, although the world will keep saying it does. And especially, oh, she's wearing that, she's a hooker, and
Mhm.
she really wants it. And she's sexualizing herself too early. And these are these underwritten tones that start. And it's different than what we're talking about in terms of love and marriage. But these are these roles that start at very young ages that stay in the back of our subconscious. And I'm like, this morning she was wearing the tight shirt and the tight pants, and she was like, but mom, if I wear that shirt, the looser shirt, the more tucked up version, she said, I'm gonna look fat. And I was like, there's just so many problems here.
I know.
So I
Like,
went to
where do
therapy
we
and was
start?
like, how do I begin with this? Like, how do you not fall into these written rules? And I would say that this talk is going to be all over the place. Of course, there's so much to talk about in this, but when we're talking about creating lives around you, so children, families, marriage, relationships of choice, we're responsible for our actions and we're responsible for our world. And I'm literally walking into the day before the anniversary of Carl's death tomorrow, and I have been not as emotional this last few days as I thought I would be. I was earlier in the month. The last podcast, you guys may have heard me. I was a hot train wreck. I can't even listen to it because I'm still so upset by all the things we talked about. It was just a lot I'm still working through. But that was the real vulnerable moment, like we're talking about. And I just think it's so important that we remember, no matter where your life is or how shattered it has been, whether you're David who lost his wife in like one day, 1 hour, really. I mean,
20 minutes.
20 minutes. His whole life went away, versus me, 5 long years of so much trauma and medical crisis. But we are in control of our life is where I'm coming this year in grief, which is like, we are the author, we are the captain, we are the bus driver. There's a million like things. You create what you want, and sometimes we forget that. And
I think that's ultimately the difference between being awake and being asleep.
yeah,
Is when you're asleep, you're essentially a passenger. I, I,
Yep.
I could go on and on and on about the things in my life that happened to me that I cannot remember deciding. I just did them. I just,
The motions.
right.
Just
Life has a momentum, and if you let it, it'll just take you. And then you wake up when you're 46 and your wife is dead, and all that momentum comes to a grinding halt. I always tell people, if I can give you 5 minutes of enlightenment that took me 46 years on a really pretty traumatic death experience, if you can get even just 5 minutes of that without having to go through that, that's a huge opportunity. Um, Now, looking back when I was completely asleep, had I listened to that, I don't know. I mean, I did know back then that I wanted more, and I suspected that there was more, but I really had no idea how to get it, where to go for it, how to even ask for it. But I did know, over the years, it would bubble up. My unhappiness and my tiredness with work, and um, every 4 to 5 years, it would really bubble up in a big blow up, and then it would just kind of pass, and we'd just go right back to sleep. Um,
I think a lot of people are like that. And I mean, even now, I still will catch myself. Like, I would go through a whole week and all of a sudden I'm like, why am I spiraling like this? And you have to like stop yourself and almost like check yourself.
so my
Real.
therapist and I have, I mean, I tend to over intellectualize things, to say the least. But I have contemplated, like, because I was asleep for most of my life, over half my life, right, completely asleep. And I've often wondered, like, what's the natural state of humanity? Is the natural state awake, and we choose to be asleep as a protection, or is the natural state asleep, and only through trauma and hardship and suffering is there enlightenment, or awakening? I really don't know. Jan thinks that the steady state is awake, but I tend to think that the steady state is probably asleep. I've thought many times, if I had died, I think Betsy would have walked the exact same journey. I know she would have. I know she would have been forced to reckon with her past and her life, and she would have woken up. I know she would have. She was very smart, very special, but very much asleep, just like I was. I don't know where I was going with that, but
I don't know. That's such an interesting thought, though. That's why I'm still thinking now. I don't know. Because even, and this is not kind of off basis of grief, but when you look at generational traumas and just,
yeah.
year over year and looking at the decades and how we're overcoming all these things, it almost does feel like people, and maybe not like, depending on your beliefs and like how the world came about, maybe when you go back to caveman days, maybe they were awake. I don't know. But I'm thinking kind of agree with, I can see your view on it. Like you were asleep because I feel like as a society, we're all becoming slowly more awake.
Now, I will say I don't think there's any question about what the preferred state is, honestly. I can't tell you now. On a daily basis, I'll have um, like checking out at Lowe's. It sounds so mundane, but you. Oh no, I'll tell you a story. You just once you're open, people come into your lives, and there's a lot of really special people out there that before I would have never spoken to, I would have never made eye contact with, and I never would have heard their story. And so I bought my son this truck for high school, and just bought a pickup truck. Seems like a pretty random, unemotional thing to do. And when I went to go pick it up, um, the guy that I bought it from was very attached to his truck. This is Texas, and he was getting emotional about it and blah blah blah. And I was like, and he said, "What are you gonna do with the truck?" So I told him that I bought it for my son, and it was part of a bargain that I made with my son to start therapy after his mom died. So he kind of refused to go to therapy and was very kind of bullheaded about it. And I'm not doing that crap. And he's scared, just scared. And so I made a deal with him that if he went to therapy and he did well in school, that I would buy him a pickup truck. So he went to therapy. And so I told this guy that I was buying the truck from, I was like, yeah, I told him the whole story. Like, my son's mom died and he's really struggled and he needed therapy, wouldn't go to therapy. So I made this deal with him that I'd buy him a pickup truck if he'd go to therapy. And the guy, I turn around, the guy's crying. Like, he was bawling, crying. And I was like, "Man, I didn't mean to upset you." And he said, "No," he says, "I lost my dad when I was 12." And he's like, he was so nice and felt so good that I had bought this truck under those circumstances. And he immediately released it, and knew it was a good thing. And I drove off thinking I would have never, ever had that conversation. I would have never asked him how he felt about his truck. I would have never found out that he lost his dad. Or, I mean, um, it's just crazy how many wonderful, nice people out there that when you keep your head down and you don't speak and don't make eye contact, you just miss so much of life um, that I didn't even know. To say nothing for this, I mean, I would have never um, literally found the love of my life. And anyway, the point is that I think that this is a better, it's a better state, and I'm happy. I'm as happy now as I've ever been in my whole life. And it's very painful to sometimes think that Betsy, she didn't suffer, but she did die in order for me to be awake, and that bothers me some, and I do have some regret about that. But it is what it is. It happened. I didn't have anything. It was a freak accident, and it has put everything into perspective as far as because I read a lot too. I could go on and on about this, but I used to read a lot of Buddhism because I thought that it kind of made sense, and it just kind of resonated with me in college and med school. And he always would talk about suffering, life is suffering, and that the path to nirvana was through suffering and the releasing of suffering. And that was just words, honestly. It never meant anything to me. I just thought, oh, that sounds okay. And now those words to me, it's so absolutely true that there's no escaping the suffering. Life is suffering. But through suffering, you have the choice to either kill yourself, like I, I thought about it. I think every widow probably thinks about, or living. And when you choose to live, pretty amazing things happen, or have happened to me. And I think a lot of the widows, when I talk to widows, and people that have lost their parents and stuff, like the people that have really suffered, they have a certain clarity sometimes that it can be lost in the fray of day to day stuff and the momentum of life. Um,
What do you think about for people who are in marriages, maybe like our previous ones? So I would say we have a lot of similarities in our past marriages. Carl and I actually were really connected emotionally. but we were both hiding would be the, the only, I don't know that there's a word for it, but I feel like that conversation we just had about vulnerability and allowing the full self to be transparent. I don't want to say it was lying because it was never that. We were very honest with each other. And I feel like we were very emotional about subjects surrounding our emotions, but never fully transparent about our needs. And I was deathly afraid if I ever said what I really needed from him that he would not love me. I was unlovable.
I felt that a lot.
And I think a lot of marriages think
I
that,
felt that
right?
if I really told her what I needed, that there was a really good chance that she would tell me she didn't love me and maybe even leave me.
Yeah.
I mean, this is like the inner voice. Um, I mean, more than likely, had I told her what she needed, that she may have stepped up, but I was way too scared to find out. And I always tell people now that are in young relationships or even old relationships that the first place to start, in my opinion, is to tell your partner what you need. And I felt the things inside back in the day. I did. They were there. I just shoved them down, which is fine for 5, 6, 10, maybe even 20 years. But eventually that that doesn't work. Your coping strategies start to break down.
I think that's when people have midlife crisis.
No doubt, there's no doubt about it.
Like, I don't
Yeah.
think it's a midlife crisis. I
Right.
think it's you can't do these coping strategies anymore. Like, you just have suffered as long as you can, and maybe the hormonal shift is like that one straw that breaks the camel's back. And I think that's why these affairs happen. So people just can't do it for that length of time anymore.
Yeah, I think midlife crisis is definitely when your prior coping strategies no longer are functional, and you need entirely new strategies.
Well, an intimacy in marriage is, you know, I'll say this. In my first marriage, this is very raw. Intimacy became very obviously problematic with chemotherapy and all sorts of drugs. So when you take sex out of a marriage, what is the marriage? It's a really interesting question. Like, when you take what we considered, or what I considered my 30s to be intimacy was sex, away in the marriage, what do you have left? And now I would call myself a questioning religious person, agnostic at this point, and I'm a recovered Catholic, I like to say. So all love to my Catholic family. I love traditions, but I am no longer a practicing Catholic. Um, However, at that time I was in his walk to death. And I remember he would get so sick and be in such violent states of pain, bleeding, you name it, that he would ask me to pray with him. And it's weird, like, that felt like the only time in our marriage where our souls were completely exposed. I felt very exposed in that. And it also felt more powerful than any sexual encounter we ever had in our marriage. And we have 2 children. So prayer, is a powerful thing. I always have believed it is. I'm not sure where it goes, or how that works, but I do believe in the power of manifestation and belief, and bearing this visceral call for help. Because I think, all of us in our marriage, whether you're just going through daily life or you're in some kind of dire straits like we were, fighting for his life, hoping for a miracle, all of us have a visceral cry in our marriage at some point, collectively. And you can do that together and create what I can honestly say is the most intimate, powerful bond beyond a physical measure, is that connection to know that you can undress the entirety of who you are and hold it up and have this person look at it and say, yeah, I still love you.
Yeah, I think that's an extremely important point, that it's a personal journey, right? You have to kind of, in a lot of ways, you're on your own, but you need your partner to give you the space to make that journey. And if you can't, I never felt like I had the space before. And now Alex she's remarkable. She lets me be anxious, and she lets me be mad, and she lets me be scared, and she lets me be insecure, and she lets me be strong. Um,
Well,
and she loves me.
I've learned too that like insecurity and anxiety and afraid are strong. I know it's hard because our gut instinct as woman is like, oh fuck, they're scared. Now I'm scared. But I think when you go in as a female widow, so widow, not widower, I was petrified and alone. And actually literally was one step away from losing everything. Jamie very well knows that. Um, and talk about suicidal and wanting to die. I mean, Jesus Christ. And having a suicidal child. So I really did lose everything in that death. But in that loss, it made me realize that I had to ask for help. I had to bear open. I had to be raw, and like I don't want to. My biggest regret is that I didn't give Carl the opportunity to love me fully. He loved me fucking a lot, and it was my fault.
Well, here's a question that I want to know, David, from you is so, as we were saying, a lot of our listeners are females, and there are females that are doing this work and they're putting in, the exercises and the journaling and the meditations, and we're all trying to be this better form of ourselves for us, for our partners, for our children. Um, but when the one individual in that marriage or that partnership starts to try to do that, right? And I think, like we said, mostly females are probably gonna be the first ones to take those steps. And then you hope that the men will, follow up, go to therapy. But how do you foresee that? I don't even know how to ask the question, right?
What to do in that scenario?
Well, it's almost how,
Tell her about the what this is us last night. It's such a poignant thing. The 10, like I'm a 10, and you're being a 6.
Yeah.
oh
Like,
yeah, well,
like,
everybody knows that one, yeah.
well, I
The
know. But I'm like, that's the
That's not what
stuff
I'm
that
trying to like
feels it.
ask, like, so when we're trying to, as the if as a female, it's easy. I'm very vulnerable. As y'all both know me, I pretty much will talk about whatever, whenever. There's nothing really that I hold back. But Darren, male, pretty classic male, I'd say. If he can't meet me with that same vulnerability, what can if me? I'm using myself as an example, and now Darren's gonna have to be thrown under the bus here. But I know there's a lot of men, I mean, a lot of women out there who feel this. How can we be supportive and help them walk that journey to wake up and to show their vulnerability and to get where we're going together? Because you and Alex are a very freak scenario, two widows together to find yourself, who literally, I mean, what y'all met. I know, David, it was only about a year after you lost your wife, and Alex, it was a little over a year, I think. So y'all were both very cracked open. Y'all were very raw, and y'all walked a lot of that together, and it was beautiful. But for someone who hasn't had that extreme wake up moment, what else
Yeah.
can you do? And I know we already covered at the beginning, of the female not being so critical when they do show any kind of vulnerability. But is there anything else that you can say as a male that would have helped you?
Yeah. So this is super cheesy. Um,
I like
but
cheesy.
I've come to the realization that it's true. In my former life, I would watch movies about love, and because it's like a common theme, and scoff at them, and I would actually make comments like, "Why is Hollywood so obsessed with love? Why can't we talk about shit that's really important and meaningful? Why is it Harry Met Sally, and why is it
I love Harry Met
I know,
Sally.
but all these
That
movies,
male.
and I used to always like really just turn off to them. But the truth is that everybody deep down, I've come to realize, wants to love and wants to be loved, and that puts us in a place in the world that's very comfortable and rewarding, and everybody wants it. Now, that can look at like all kinds of things, right? You can love a horse, and you can uh, love a cat, or what, it doesn't necessarily have to be, but everybody wants to love. And that's, I think, for me, that would have been the key. Like someone that comes along and says, listen, I need these things, right? I need to feel more. I need to know what you're feeling. And it can be difficult for men to verbalize it, but in my opinion, the root of the anxiety is they're really worried that in that journey you're not going to love them. And if they take the journey, that you're not going to love them. And if you really knew um, what they were really thinking and what they really wanted and what they really needed, because they maybe never shared that with you when you were dating in high school or college, because you become a different, you're becoming a person. And when you're becoming a person with other people, you become something that may or may not be yourself, or that may just change over time. Your needs change. And I think it's a deep rooted fear amongst men and probably women too, that if I really share my feelings or explore my feelings, right? Because some feelings like move around. It's like a moving target. Sometimes you feel this, sometimes you feel that way. And I think that there's a deep fear that will lead to the loss of love. And I think people are willing to accept kind of the facade of love at the price of not really telling their partner what they need. Now, it's
So
unfortunate though that some partners are going to tell, particularly people that have been asleep a long time. This is my opinion. I think that some people will tell their partner what they need, and the other partner may be like, "Well, I can't give you that." And then you're kind of in an impasse. That's where your part. That's where your therapist might say, "Look, you guys might be better apart than together," and that's tragic and sad, but it's not necessarily meaningless. It's not necessarily not right. Um,
It is sad, but it's also
and I think from what I know, people that have been fired by their therapist, that's the common theme, right?
Mhm.
yeah.
Right. When
Well, I
when
think
the, when the man refuses to participate, then there's not much you can.
well, and how many guests have we had on? Almost every divorce we've been in has been this very same scenario where you're saying what you need, right? We have to get brave enough to do that. You're giving space for them to feel best you know how to do. You're trying to get to therapy, and if there's no participation in any of those parts, at what point, how long? It's a personal decision, of course. Do you want to sit in that and wait for someone else to come to their own healing? Because I do think he already said this, but it's individualized togetherness, right? So we are unique, David and I, because we both have been through a massive loss. But David literally, if you ever talk to people that knew him prior to us knowing him, I know nothing of him except for this version because this is, well, I know that he has evolved a lot since I met him. When I first met him, he really, actually, to be fair, did not ever ask himself how he felt. So, like, I'd be like, "Well, how do you feel?" He'd be like, "I don't know.
Well, she would ask me
I don't
what I
know."
want, and I was like, I remember the first time she asked me, I thought, my God, I don't think anybody's ever really asked me what I want. It was a real eye opening experience. And then you have to ask yourself the hard question, which is, what the fuck do I want? And realizing that you really have never asked yourself in your most of your life, what the fuck do I want?
Yeah.
Which
Well,
is a
in the
crazy.
year that I met him and started to ask him what he wanted was the same year that I asked my business partnership as I was trying to ask myself. Actually, I knew what I wanted. I wanted to be married and I wanted a family again. And I was deeply in love. And I wanted to find a way to make this cross city life come together and I knew we were going to get engaged. I knew we were going to get married, but I had no idea how to make that happen with all the responsibilities I had. And when I asked my business partner that I'm no longer partners with, well, what do you want to do? I mean, that was a tailspin because
Mhm.
she could not answer that question. And I realized David also couldn't answer that question. I guarantee Carl actually could answer that question sharply, like Darren,
Mhm.
sharply in his career. There wouldn't be one. Carl would have given me the right answer for everything emotionally. That was the tricky. And Darren reminds me a lot of Carl in a really good way. He's got that big heart and he's warm and he's been through a lot and he
His
hides
big
it
heart is
well.
just undercover. Yeah.
That's right. No, I mean, I actually think his big heart is really, it's right there for everyone to feel it. But I think in the marriage, it's undercover a little bit more because his love language to you is steady, is providing, is getting it done, is, check boxes and building things and like keeping a home, and I think he's I'm obsessed with your husband, first of all. He's doing
Me
things
too.
that,
Well, he's driving me crazy right now because he's working
well, he's a
outside
fucking
and
miracle.
leaving the door open. So if y'all have background sound in this podcast, anyone who's
With her
listening,
echoing.
because of him.
Well, we're in our dressing room, keeping it really intimate today because I'm like, our kids are gonna bust through at any point. It's Friday. We're off schedule and we've got COVID in my house. It's just been such a week. But no, Darren is a I mean, talk about breaking generational trauma.
Yeah.
What I would say to you is your love is going to be more powerful than most, but your patience is going to have to be
Yeah.
incredible, Jamie,
I think
Well,
because
we're
you're
not
going to
going
have
on
to
to a Jamie therapy thing
well,
right
no,
now.
but you're going to have to hold a lot of space for Darren because it wasn't modeled to him, and to break open what he's been through. Her husband's been through a lot, family history of substance abuse, in a pretty significant manner, and he was in charge of his whole family, and still is in lots of ways. And I'll say it because Jamie would never say it, so your family can come at me. And Darren told me himself, so I'm in the blabbermouth of this group, long-winded and talking too much. But
Well,
it's important that we know that. So who did you marry, right? This is what I'm saying to the people out there asking this question. Who did you marry? We have to fucking actually look at that. Like, I think sometimes we marry and we get engaged and we're like glimmer-eyed. We're like, he's this great chef or he's this surgeon, and we see like all the good parts. But when the chips fall and everything goes away, like he also comes from this lineage of A, B, and C. And what does that actually mean for how he was modeled love, family, children, support, and like how can we work on that together to say like what happened to you that was so hurtful to you in your childhood, and how can we not do that together to our children,
well, here's
or
the question I wanted to. So when David answered my last question, and he said that it's the fear of being unloved, but I think that, of course, is like the very true statement. Like when we do our fear chart, like the global desire. But
Yeah.
I think you know, again, I don't like journalizing. I keep journalizing, but men that I've come across, they'd have to really work to understand that that's their global desire. So I guess what's the more of the full, like the facade or the assumption that they have in their head, do you to stop them from opening up? Does that make sense what I'm trying to say? Like, yes, I
Yeah.
understand unlovable is the global desire, like deep rooted, but I don't think everyone is there to and that in touch to realize that.
I think you'll be surprised, and I found this to be true in the last 3 years, that um, really good truths like that, most people can hear. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
let's say you're trying to engage with your spouse and they're just not wanting to participate. And this may be completely starry eyed and crazy of me to think, but I believe in my heart of hearts that if you really can communicate to your partner that you love them and will love them through this personal journey, but you need to take this journey. You need to feel and you need to open up. I think most people can hear it. And hearing it is like 99.99% of the battle.
yeah, just listening.
Yeah, just being able to hear it. And I,
Mhm.
um,
You don't have to like
I've told
say it.
I've told people crazy shit since I've had so many revelations with therapy, that you almost feel like evangelical that you need to share like this little tidbit when you rub up on somebody that needs just a little. And I've been amazed how a lot of people can hear it. Now, whether or not they it's actionable or not, that's up to them. But um, I find most people can hear what you're saying. Even my 17-year-old son.
Wow.
Um, yeah, sometimes when he's in the right state of mind, he can hear, and it's really special when they hear. Um, yeah, but I'm kind of a really positive person as well. I really believe that people. I mean, I'm living proof that people can grow and change and hear and love.
That's it for part 1 of our interview with my husband, David Long. I hope you've enjoyed our candid conversation about grief, waking up, and his healing journey. We had so much to cover with David that we are making this a 2-part episode. So please join us next week for the second half of our conversation. We'll be diving more into our different grief journeys and how they affected our children in many different ways. David will also share some of the big takeaways he got in the early days of his therapy journey and how therapy helped him understand things differently and make positive changes, especially in his family dynamic. We touch on so many things: body image stuff, anxiety, having a gratitude practice, mindfulness, all the things. You just don't want to miss it. Thanks for listening.
This has been the Wake the F Up podcast with Alix and Jamie, a podcast about normalizing and overcoming challenges like grief and fear. Be sure to check out our other episodes, where our community of experts share tools and ideas to help you wake to the life inside of you. If you enjoyed this episode of Wake the F Up, please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And join the Wake community by downloading our app. Just search for Wake Wellness in the Apple or Android App Store. And follow us on Instagram @TheWakeWellness. Thanks for listening. This podcast is produced by Caroline Pickens and the team at Fresh Picked Studio. For more information, go to freshpickedstudio.com.